Welcome to JANUS Radio episode 8. We're here in the studio with guest Richard Dudas, and I'm also here with guest MC VPR.
안녕하세요. 야누스 라디오 개그원 MC VPR입니다.
We just heard Prelude number 2 for clarinet and computer, written in 2006 by Richard Dudas. Welcome to Richard Dudas.
Thanks.
How are you?
Welcome.
You might want to use a mic
Um,
at some point.
might help
So it's good to have you here. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about this piece? It's the first time, actually, it's the second time we've played your music here. We played an electronic piece of yours a few weeks ago called Etudes for Virtual Objects, which is very cool. So tell us a little bit about the prelude for clarinet and computer.
This was written for a friend who's a clarinetist, of course. And there was a festival in Germany that we were both going to, and he was going to play some other music, do a full concert of clarinet and electronics pieces. So he asked me to write a piece to add into that concert mix.
Yeah, the performer of this performance we just listened to is Pete Furness. Is that the performer who commissioned who asked
Correct.
for the piece?
Yeah. Exactly. Like, we're old friends. We studied together in Budapest at the Liszt Academy after we both finished. He's from the UK, and so we both met there, and we hit it off because we're both like little kids, and so we enjoyed each other's company and eating good food and making good food, and so.
I think, well, actually, it's funny to have you both here because VPR was the first guest of JANUS Radio.
Yeah.
He played some really cool stuff for modular synth and gear for us, some pretty wild, noisy stuff. It was great. So it's cool to have, like, the first two guests are really different sides of what's possible with electronic sound. So I assume you have a lot of questions for Richard, like in terms of what the hell he's doing and how the sounds are made. I don't know.
Yeah. What I have always curious about the more general questions about how to make music or in the aspect of composing, because I have not learned kind of classical music or based on this kind of study. I'm currently major in the electronical engineering, so wanted to ask some kind of aesthetics. So what is the biggest important thing that you consider when are you composing or making some stuff or work at the studio or whatever?
So, well, what like you're saying is like aesthetical things. I guess the biggest thing is this something I would want to listen to? It's like I want to write it for myself. I mean, maybe that's very selfish, but I figure if I like it at least, then other people might also. And so, I guess I kind of feel that that's the important criteria is to try something to make something new that I want to hear that hasn't been made yet. And that's not always easy because you've got, especially with the computer, as you know, you've got like a world of possibilities, a universe of possibilities. Like Jared was saying, anything between noisy stuff and really pure, simple, empty stuff. And where do you go in that? And that's I guess the first question you ask yourself is, what do I want to hear and where do I want to go in that space?
I should mention now, early off in the show, that just earlier today in the studio, Richard, you performed for us a very, very cool improvisation for viola and live electronic sound. So everyone can hear that on JANUS Live. That's going to be up on SoundCloud, and we have a great video of Richard playing on YouTube. This is very cool. Actually, that's a good thing to mention quickly, because the side of yourself musically that came out in that improvisation and the side of yourself that's presented in this prelude for clarinet and computer we just heard they're both very convincing, but they're extremely different. Different. Maybe you can say a brief word, and we'll probably talk about it more later in the show. Maybe you can say a brief word about how it is that a composer who's so versed in electronic sound, specifically you're well known for working with Max MSP specifically, and we'll get to that later. A composer that's so adept and known for using software like Max MSP, complicated live electronics, how is it that many of your compositions like this prelude are so lyrical and pretty? Because we often associate Max MSP and this with like really abstract, kind of weird out there avant-garde, so can you give like a small intro to that? Because I think we'll come back to it later.
I think a lot of people are confused by that, actually. I had a friend who heard one of my pieces with electronics, and actually, I think we're going to hear it at the end of this show. It's the flute piece, and
Great.
he just said, "Well, why didn't you just write a piece for like 11 flutes or something?" Why?
Because I don't know 11 flutists.
There we go, and that's a valid thing. And I guess for me, I thought it was, I don't know. I think it's interesting to see if you can treat the computer like you would another musician. To think of it as kind of like a person, and what would another musician who's electronic want to play, or what would you want to play with that other robot person? And maybe part of it is also trying to sort of teach the computer. Maybe it's like a Henry Higgins, Eliza Doolittle kind of relationship where, you know, the computer is really stupid and you have to kind of teach it to do everything, even simple stuff. And when you end up teaching the computer to do things, teaching in a abstract kind of sense, you learn a lot yourself about how you think and how you work. So part of it actually is, when I said making something that I want to hear, it's also understanding what I am doing and where I am at that point in my creativity somehow. And working with the computer forces you to do that, because you can't just write something on paper and give it to someone and hear something beautiful come out. To make the computer do beautiful stuff, it takes a lot of like crying and
to make the computer make ugly sounds is relatively easier, a little bit easier.
I can just pull out the plug and
Well, we're going to talk a lot throughout the show, so let's go on to the second piece, and then maybe we'll discuss the second piece after.
Yeah, sounds like
all
fun.
the music today was chosen by Richard, so this is all music that's special to you in some way. And this next piece that we're going to hear is by Jean-Claude Risset, who passed away only a few years ago. Is that right?
Ago.
Yeah, and
A few years ago.
the piece is called Sud, an electronic piece from 1985. This is an excerpt from part 3. Let's take a listen.
Okay.
We just heard an excerpt from Sud by Jean-Claude Risset from 1985 that was released on a Vergo CD in 1988.
장클로드 리세의 수드를 들으셨습니다.
So tell us a little bit about that piece, why you chose it, and so on.
When I was an undergrad student, I was studying computer music and composition. And this was a new piece. And I think it was just a few years after it was written, I heard it. They got a recording and they played it in, I think someone had gone to France and got the recording and came back with it. And I was blown away. So his idea was he took real world sounds like insects and sound of the ocean and waves under the docks and birds, and he took these and transformed them on this special real-time dedicated computer that the French radio had made, and with special software that was written to be able to give color and pitch to these sort of nature sounds.
So is it mostly not synthesized sounds what we're hearing? It's mostly transformed, or it's both?
It's both,
Yeah,
but
both.
it's mostly transformed sounds that have been so transformed they sound like synthesis, basically.
That's
cool. It's really cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
So, I mean, we mentioned it a little at the beginning of the show, that you're especially known for working with Max MSP software. So what was your transition from, being a music student and becoming interested in computer music and somehow falling in with Max, which is now this super famous software for live electronics processing? I mean, it's quite different than the electronics we heard in the Risset piece in a way, right?
Actually, yeah.
So what's that? I'm sure it's a long journey in some sense, but what's the journey from, let's say, tape music essentially to music done live for you? In
between those two, there was this system called MIDI, which is basically a protocol for communicating between synthesizer, controller keyboards, and other kinds of controllers and the computer.
Right.
And that was sort of the bridge there, because it allowed synthesizers, commercial synthesizers, to be controlled by the computer at a time when computers didn't have the processing power themselves to be able to do what Risset is doing here on this. It was like a giant box. I said it looked like a big photocopy machine, basically, but with like audio inputs and outputs. And so MIDI was something that people could get, their favorite synthesizers and play notes from their computer, or create algorithms. And so that was sort of the first real-time thing. Like people were able to not do tape but to do live stuff with a rack of synthesizers. And then when computers got fast enough, they started being able to process audio and do the kinds of things that Risset was doing in that piece, but on your laptop, basically. So it's
this is more or less in the 90s-ish?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this whole transition happened in the 90s. In the 80s, Risset was doing stuff in this special system because he had access to that at the French radio. And in the 90s, people started having access to, I guess in the 80s, MIDI and synthesizers. But then in the 90s, computers started getting fast enough to be able to do simple things. And by 2000, more complex things. So Max, the key about Max is Max was originally made for MIDI and for sending MIDI data.
Yeah.
So if you had a synthesizer and a computer, you could basically get Max and have Max create stuff. Like you could program Max to make algorithms and to send notes to the synthesizer. So later on, when audio was added to Max, you could then control audio directly on the computer in the same way that you would send MIDI notes to synthesizers.
Right.
And you could also get MIDI notes from synthesizers and use those to play stuff inside the computer. So this transition from tape to live, or studio to live, had this intermediary of MIDI, and Max just happened to be the thing that people were using a lot to map MIDI data from controllers to MIDI data that got sent out to synthesizers.
Were you working with MIDI as a student before you got before it was possible to work with live electronics, or were you mainly focusing on the classical side of composition? The acoustic side of composition.
Both, actually. Yeah, both. Because, I'm one of the last generations who, learned how to splice tape and, actually work with reel-to-reel tape recorders. I think my last year in college, we got the early DigiDesign audio card, and so we actually were, I tried to edit stuff on the screen. It was the first time we could do that. So this was all new stuff in 1990. There may have been systems before then that did it, but this was the first one that was widely available.
Yeah.
So I got to kind of do both because we had MIDI equipment in our studios and we had tape recorders and a big Moog synthesizer, and then we got the digital system. So I kind of
there's another guy
I got to use all of it, kind of a little bit of all, mix and match.
I was just going to say, there's another guy sitting next to you right here who uses a Moog synthesizer. Who's slightly newer Moog synthesizer, but we saw it in the studio last time.
Most of the people in my generations who are interested in the music, they have some kind of really kind of high level, like a high level language. We don't have to know how to build some kind of MIDI signals, or don't have to know about the really deeper level of the how to make the music. There are so many VSTs or plugins.
These high-level modules that you know what the result of it is, and you can connect it to the next thing.
Sometimes it's really comfortable, but sometimes people get the information or how the those kind of information too easily, without knowing what's happening inside of what's the basic theory or the criteria of the making music. Sometimes I think it has some kind of trade-offs between them.
Yeah. I was just going to say you don't need to know how to make a violin to be able to write music for the violin. So
true.
But then if you do understand the acoustics of the instruments you're working with, then it helps you write for those instruments in a more natural or closely, tightly linked kind of way. And I think it's the same with computer music too, electronic music. You can take the output of your oscillator from the Moog and listen to it and think it's really, really cool, and then accidentally plug it in the wrong place and get something else. And then you kind of want to know, what did I just do, and how, what else can I do?
So on the path to the next piece, the Risei we just heard is this wonderful kind of naturalistic kind of sounds and processed, nature sounds especially. It has this it's a wonderful atmosphere, that piece. Kind of being outdoors but also in space at the same time.
Exactly.
So the next piece is really different. And it's kind of, I don't want to lead you, but I'll just say, for Seungyeok and I, who actually met through enjoying club music, rhythm-based electronic dance music, essentially. It's how we first met. It's quite a surprise to hear this Subotnik, which is famous, but which I admit I didn't really know before you showed it to me. So
it's a great piece.
It's very cool. So anyway, Richard, just tell us a little bit about Morten Subotnik, this piece, Silver Apples of the Moon, which is from 1967.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the piece and why you chose it.
Before I was born, even. Wow.
Oh my God.
This was one of the, at least in American computer music, this was sort of one of the pioneer landmark pieces because Subotnik, who had been working with the Buchla synthesizer in California and stuff, I think had moved to New York, and somehow None Such Records was looking to. They were doing a lot of early music and a lot of new music, and they were trying to commission a piece of music that was meant to be performed in your living room on your record player. So they commissioned him to do this totally electronic piece. I guess they heard about him through various, hip channels. And they commissioned him to do this piece that was designed to be played on a record player. So it was made for vinyl, basically.
To be played in your home, more or less.
Yeah, to be played in your home. There was no concert performance of it. Of course, later they had concert performances of it. along with some like video, not video, but there was an artist who did like video or light projection kind of things on transparencies. So this piece was really influential because it was, I don't know, it was just out there. And the first side of the record is just kind of like bleep, bleep, bloop, bleep, boom, bling, bling. And that's
60s
fun.
electronic music, in
Exactly,
other words.
exactly.
Yeah,
It was 60s electronic
like,
music.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden you flip it over on side 2 and it just goes crazy. And it's great.
So that's
and
what we're going to listen to
and
is
it's
part
just
2.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So very, very inspiring.
Great. So we're going to listen to a bit of part 2 of Morton Subotnick's Silver Apples of the Moon, released on None Such Records, 1967.
몰턴 스포트닉의 Silver Apples of the Moon 파트 2를 들어보시겠습니다. 몰턴 스포닝의 Silver Apples of the Moon Part 2를 들으셨습니다. Richard, most of the what I wanted to ask you is that most of the composed work or the artwork, etc., has a description or really specific subject. For example, just like the title of the Sputnik track, the title or the is Silver Apples of the Moon Part 2, or some kind of, for example, someone called their music subject themselves as a kind of this track is about the sadness, or this track is about the kind of happiness. But I think the track or specific track component is just a sound, the vibration of the air. So of which component do you think has the role of the link or connection between the actual physical work and the subject?
Complicated. If you look,
That's
that's a really deep question. It's a seriously deep question.
Yeah.
So if you look at all the pieces here, so Jean-Claude Risset's piece "Sud de South," because he was thinking of the sounds of the south of France, and "Silver Apples of the Moon" actually comes from a line from a poem.
Right.
And then we have some other pieces that we're going to hear later with sort of poetic titles. And all of my pieces are like preludes, sonata.
Yeah, you have these very classical... but I mean, for people who don't know, let's clarify. What those are referring to basically abstract forms.
Right,
like
abstract
it's referring
forms.
to the shape of the piece, the way that melodies come back and maybe repeat, or
Right.
the way that it moves through different keys and scales of
Right.
music, generally.
Generally.
So, in other words, your titles tend to be quite formal about sort of material in a way.
Right. But I don't try, my titles don't give away any kind of emotion or any clue about what I was thinking about when I wrote that piece. It's strange. I sometimes have an idea in mind, or an emotion in mind. Not always. Sometimes you have a abstract idea and it comes out. So my personal, so some people need the artistic visual image or poetic image, or they need some non-musical thing in order to get inspiration to write music. And I'm kind of not that way. I'm kind of like, like you said, it's just like basically vibrations in the air that are represented somehow as numbers or electricity or whatever. And I'm sort of more of that distant. My thinking is that it's when I write, I'm not trying to think about, I want to write a piece about love, or I want to write a piece about death, or I want to, I'm not thinking of these kind of things. But probably I'm just thinking I want to write a piece and I have an idea. Maybe it sounds like this, and but maybe there are some subconscious things that anyway come out. If I went to a museum and saw a painting that I liked, and or one time I was thinking definitely about, it was like winter, and sort of when I re-listen to the piece, I think about sort of snowfall and cold, because that's what was going on when I was writing the piece. But that's not what the piece is about. But that's my connection. Does that make any sense? It's not. So for me, it's not a. Yeah, some people need that poetic title, and I don't. But I'm not going to say it's not there. I think somehow your mind has ways of letting things out, whether you are thinking about it consciously or not.
Well, the next piece that we're going to hear is one that's, again, by you, and it is a piece with a title like this. It's a sonata for clarinet and piano. It's written in 2004, and we're only going to listen to the third movement, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about the piece first.
Yeah, sure. Again, this is my friend Pete Furness, who I'm thinking, how far back am I going to go in the story of this piece? Actually, I'll go back to the beginning. I was doing a lot of electronic music. I was in France studying electronic music and then at IRCAM and writing. I wanted to write a piece that was acoustic and not electronic. And so I started on a piece actually for contrabass and piano.
Nice instrument.
Right. Because I have these friends who are husband and wife and they're piano and bass performers. And I thought, I'll write them a piece because... and somehow at some point, this friend of mine, Pete, he said, I'd really like you to write like a clarinet sonata or a clarinet piece, like a concert piece, because I'm trying to put together a CD and I'd like to put some of my friends' music. He asked another friend of ours, a mutual friend, and he wrote a piece. So he said, you have to write this. So I went back to grad school and I took, not because of that, but I went back to grad school just
to prepare.
To prepare. And I thought, I'll take my bass piece sketches and make a clarinet piece. And so I got 2 movements finished, and I was really happy with them. And then the third movement, I just thought, okay, this is not working out, so I put it away. And he kept bugging me and saying, you've got to finish the third movement. You've got to finish the third movement. And I realized I need to just scrap what I'd written and start over. And I decided to start over with something a little bit less serious and a little more fun. I consciously took things. I'm into all kinds of music. I like early music, modern music, computer music, acoustic music. Music is music. If it's good, it's good. And let's just say if you like it, whether it's good or not. You can like bad music too.
True.
I mean, there's pieces that I think some people consider as really bad music, but I think it's just great stuff. So
it's probably true for all of us.
So I'm okay with enjoying that. So I thought I want to kind of get some of my feelings about early music and this sort of lively, like Renaissance-y kind of feel, and a little bit of jazz. And I just sort of made this weird hodgepodge rondo, which is a form where things come back from the beginning, and they keep coming back and going away and coming back and going away. And it's a traditional way of ending a piece. And I thought, I need to write something light and fun and not sort of get bogged down in a serious third movement to finish it.
That's great. So we're going to listen to the finale, movement 3 of Richard Dudas' Sonata for Clarinet and Piano, written in 2004. The performers are Pete Furness, clarinet, David Layer Jones on piano, and the sound engineer of this recording is James Shannon. This was released on a CD Clarinet Classics label in 2007.
리처드 두다스의 소나타 for Clarinet and Piano Movement 3를 들어보시겠습니다.
We just heard the final movement, Movement 3, from Richard Dudas' Sonata for Clarinet and Piano, performed by Pete Furness, David Layer-Jones. Yeah, so I'm going to tease you because I know you well. It's only half teasing, though. So we've talked about it a million times, but again, I think one of the most interesting things about your work is this, in a way, it is a tension. I think it's a very interesting and positive tension, but this tension between the side of you as an acoustic composer and the side of you as a composer who's dealing with really the technical intricacies of sound and computing, right? Now, when we hear this piece, we don't hear the electronic side of you at all, but we hear, I think it's safe to say, a deep love for the classical music tradition. So maybe you can say briefly, although I'm sure the story is not really so brief, how you grew up as a lover of classical music, but also somehow fell into the nerdy pursuits of the computer music life.
Yeah. I can remember one of the first things. So we had this next door neighbor, and they had lots of classical records, and they had a garage sale, and no one bought any of the records. And she came over and said, "Well, Richard likes music. Just let he can have these." So I got all these classical records, including like Horowitz playing Scarlatti. And all these things.
That's good.
And one of them was this recording of the Brandenburg Concertos by Bach. And I fell in love with number 2, and I put it on over and over and over and over. It was done with an early music ensemble, so it was on original instruments and had this sort of weird, interesting sound. It was not like a classical orchestra. And I just like totally fell in love with that piece. And I'm sure, maybe that's why I put fugues and everything, because it's like Bach was like the first thing that I realized, oh, this is great music. What was the question again?
Well, no, that's great. So then the question is, how do you go from being a young musician who's interested in Bach and interested in the great classical music to being interested in programming computers to make crazy sounds?
I think it was my piano teacher when I was in high school, a woman named Diane Hewitt. She always made me write music, and she made comments like, well, probably one day we're going to have computer screens on the piano and pedals to turn pages.
Whoa.
And this was like in the 80s, in the early 80s.
She was a futurist.
She realized this was coming. And there was another piano teacher who was involved with MIDI and doing like MIDI sequencing on before Mac, it was like on the Apple II computers and really like early MIDI stuff. And she put me in contact with this other teacher to sort of learn about what MIDI was and how you could deal with computers and music. So I went to the Guitar Center, what's it called?
Yeah.
Guitar Center, actually. And I've got a sampling synthesizer, and I got a MIDI interface, and I got all the gear.
And you're about how old at this time? High school?
16?
Yeah, wow. Okay.
16.
Yeah.
15, 16?
Yeah, that's an early
so
start.
It was like really, really early. It was just, MIDI was new. It had just come out a couple of years before then. So basically by the time I got to college, and the teacher that I studied with, Jean Ivey, she was the founder of the computer music studios at Peabody. And so I realized, well, I'm studying with this lady and she's the computer music person. I should at least take a class in computer music and see what it's all about. And then you get hooked.
Right.
And then you realize...
Then you swallowed the bait.
Right. And because I'd already had the experience with MIDI, I came in being very naive about what I knew, of course, but I came in with some kind of interest and experience. Even simple experience, but it was a start. It was like I swallowed the bait, and then pretty soon I'm
And now look where you are.
Now
look what happened.
Exactly. Look what happened. It's terrible.
VPR 씨는 뭐 물어보고 싶은 거 더 있었죠?
These days there are so many informations around the world, just like I said before. Is there any workflow or the method that you are using while you are adopting new techniques or the new algorithms or the inspirations in your brain?
I think when it comes to computer music, I mean, yeah, we all, you give a concert, you take an old thing you've done and fix it up. And I mean, Handel did that. The Messiah is like mostly, he wrote a new overture and took all the other music from pre-existing pieces. Basically, he couldn't have written a long piece like that in 2 weeks if he didn't cannibalize his old music to make a new piece. So we need to do that sometimes. But generally, I feel with my computer music, I try to do something different each time. So I did a couple pieces in this series of the preludes, and I did a few of them, and then I kind of stopped because I realized I don't have anything more to say right now about, you know, that's new. So I put the series on hold until I have time and ideas to make something new. So I try to do something new each time, even though that's not always, you know, feasible or possible. Workflow, very bad workflow.
A lot of coffee and stress.
A lot of coffee and stress. Yeah.
And during those kind of iteration or in the trial and errors, during the kind of exploring the sounds you're making, how do you determine the way, like, am I doing right or am I doing wrong? So change the method or how do you make the decisions?
Yeah, I think it boils down to, is it something I want to listen to? I try a lot of stuff, some of it strange and avant-garde and out there, and some of it like just kind of boring. And I try a wide spectrum of things before I start composing. I just try out ideas about what happens if I do this to the sound, what happens if I do that to the sound, what happens if I do this. And some of those are good and some of them are trash. Maybe the things that are trash might be good for another piece, or, you know, the experience and knowing how to make something, even if it's not what I want to do right now, is important. But I think you need to do that kind of exploration to find out the things that you can use or that you need, that you can put together to make a certain project that you want to make work. I guess that's kind of, I hope that answers the kind of the question. I feel, again, that's a Google question.
So let's start to make paths toward the next piece. The next piece is by Ivan Cherepnin. Just say a word about who he was.
He was a computer music person and professor at Harvard. He's the grandson of Nikolai Cherepnin, who was a famous Russian composer. And of course the son of Alexander Cherepnin, who was another famous Russian composer.
Musical family.
The Cherepnin family is a big musical family. His brother Serge made a synthesizer called the Serge. And he actually, because his brother made the synthesizer, his brother's also a composer and computer music guy, and so the two brothers kind of teamed up, and he did a lot of these pieces in the 70s using the Serge synthesizer live on stage and doing live processing. And I didn't hear about him until like late 80s, when a friend of mine who had studied at Harvard knew him and introduced me to his music. I never met him, unfortunately, although I would have liked to, because I heard a lot of good things about him from this friend who studied with him. And so basically, yeah, I heard his music and realized he was someone who is thinking about computer music in a way I'd like to think about computer music, and to bring it out of the studio onto the stage.
Great. So let's take a listen to the next selection. This is Ivan Cherepnin's Satur Live, which is scenes from a piece called Santur Opera. And this is the overture called The Situation in the Land from 1977.
이반 체럿님의 Satur Live 그리고 Overture The Situation in the Land 들어보시겠습니다.
Those are very cool sounds. That was the overture to Ivan Cherepnin's Santur Live from 1977, released on a 1995 CD on Composers Recordings. I think since the next piece is such a cool departure and a nice selection by Richard, I think we're just going to play it and then we'll talk about it a bit after. This is called Ergen Dedo, or the Song of Shopshko. It's a traditional Bulgarian folk song. Let's take a listen.
Dum 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 Ergen deda cerven deda heta kapataka na krivile kalpaceto heta kapataka Ergen deda cerven deda heta kapataka na krivile kalpaceto heta kapataka Ergen deda cerven deda heta kadum kapataka na krivile kalpaceto heta
So we just took a listen to Ergen Dedo, a traditional Bulgarian folk song. This was an arrangement of a traditional Bulgarian folk song. Came out on an LP from 1975 originally.
엘간데도의 불가리안 민요를 들어보셨습니다.
So that's clearly so far the sort of surprise selection for today. So
Always gotta have
far,
a surprise.
yeah. I mean, how did you discover this music? I'd never heard it before. It's very cool. I'd never heard it before. How'd you? Yeah.
So I was trying to think why I chose that, and I think looking at all these pieces, they're all things I discovered around the same time, and they're all things I discovered around a time when I was just starting to develop my own ideas about music and computer music. And so I think I chose this one because it's from that time.
Yeah.
Just that's that. I discovered it. I had a friend again who said, "Oh, you've got to hear this. It's really amazing." And I listened to it. I thought, "Oh wow, yeah, that's really cool."
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of variety on these CDs. These are all like jazzy arrangements by a guy named Filip Kutev and Kasimir Kyrgyzsky, and they did a lot of these sort of jazzed up arrangements of folk songs. And so this is one of the ones I really loved. I just thought it was really cool. It's in 7. It has a weird beat. It's it has that strange thing at the end where they're like making these strange sounds, and I don't know. It somehow inspired me in terms of its energy.
I'm wondering if there's a part of you still, I mean, to this day, that's attracted to just the energy of a cappella vocal music, or if that's wrong.
It's strange. I don't consider myself someone who like really likes a lot of vocal music, but I end up listening to a lot more than I think I do. So maybe in the deep down inside, it's a primal kind of thing.
Yeah, and when I chose the order of these selections, I decided to put that right next to the next selection you chose. And I know that has, which is a piece by the 14th century composer. For those people who are listening, yes, 14th century. The guy died in 1377, right?
700 years ago.
700 years ago he was born. Over 700 years ago. Guillaume de Machaut. And you're going to play a motet by Guillaume de Machaut. And I know, since I know you very well outside this radio program, I know that especially recently you've been really, really interested in the music of Machaut, which I also like and I've known for a while, not as long as you have. And so much so that now you're actually doing some academic research that's related to Machaut. So now we have you as a viola player, classical musician who likes to compose with slightly older forms, who also programs computer music, and now you're heading into the world of 14th century French polyphony. Makes me want to quit. So thanks for that. No, but anyway, tell us about the Machaut piece. Tell us about the title and maybe a little bit about the meaning or the text here, and perhaps why you're so drawn to Machaut lately.
Okay. The piece is a ballade. It's a pop song, I guess, basically from the 14th century. And it's Dame de qui toute ma joie vient, lady from whom all my joy comes. So it's one of these sort of medieval kind of courtly chivalry. What's this called?
Like a symbolist love song.
Symbolist love song,
yeah.
Exactly. And I heard this again around the same time that I heard all the pieces that are on this that I chose, and at the time, Machaut and early music was kind of, I mean, it'd been known about for years, but some really great performances were being done in the 70s and 80s, where they would go back and look at performance practice and try to get the sound that people wrote about.
You mean in the time of the composer?
The time of the composer,
Right.
People would write and say, oh, the correct way of playing this is to make a sound that sounds this way, and you perform this way. And so they were going back and trying to not just play it like they played, Wagner, but to go back and try to get a sound that's closer to what the original would have been. So on some level, in the 80s, this music was just as new as stuff like Sud.
Sure.
I mean, they were both new because no one had ever heard the music being performed like this before.
Yeah, that's crazy to think that if people are, digging up music like this in the 70s and 80s, some of it literally hadn't been sung on the earth for hundreds of years. And then suddenly it sort of lives again. And now, as you and I know, in the world of classical music, Machaut is experiencing, this is a terrible adjegeg, but a new renaissance, shall we say? Do you get it? He's from the Renaissance? Anyway, sorry.
Anyway.
So, but yeah, I mean, now his music has suddenly become popular. Really, it's sung a lot and
really?
studied a lot.
Yeah,
And
I
at
guess,
least
yeah.
I tend to see his name, even, young avant-garde composers they like to drop a Machaut quote here and there. So he's somehow become hip. Like a young avant-garde composer will not quote Brahms.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
Beethoven.
Right.
Well, maybe Beethoven.
Maybe.
It's too easy
Okay.
to tear
Yeah,
down the
yeah.
great statue, But Machaut is kind of hip.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. Do you happen to know about the meaning of the text that's being sung? It's just like...
It's basically just sort of like a courtly love song. I will obey you, dear precious lady, until more than anyone could ever want me to do in 10,000 years. Or, it's one of these. It's one of these.
Yeah.
It really is a courtly love song. It's actually part of a longer poem with music that he wrote. I mean, when a poem, it's like, pages and pages of poetry. And it's an autobiographical poem about the poet-composer who is writing in an old style and out of ideas, and fortune comes to him and teaches him how to write in a new style. So again, it's this thing about new music, and he writes this ballad in this new style that's like... So it's
people often say that Machaut, we were talking about like the 1340s, 1350s here, right?
Yeah.
That he was basically like a self-consciously avant-garde composer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that seems true for you? I mean, you know the music pretty well.
If you write a poem about yourself where Lady Fortune comes to you and teaches you how to write in a new avant-garde style, then you're pretty self-conscious about it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's take a listen. I won't try to pronounce the French, but we're going to listen to a beautiful ballade by Guillaume de Machaut. This is sung by the Gothic Voices, conducted by Christopher Page, and it came out on a Hyperion CD in 1987.
기욤 데 마쇼의 노래 들어보시겠습니다.
Fantastic stuff. Really fantastic music. Guyam Dimasho. What a interesting guy. I should remind everybody, since we're coming up to the last composition of today's show, that we have an awesome performance by Richard Dudas, our guest, on JANUS Live. You can see that on SoundCloud and hear it on SoundCloud, see it on YouTube. Watch it on YouTube. It's a great video performing some really cool stuff, live computer electronics and viola. I think maybe that'll be my final question to you, and then I know that VPR has something you'd like to ask. My final question to you is, the pieces we've heard of yours today so far were a prelude for clarinet and computer, and then a totally acoustic piece, a chamber music piece, and now the final piece of yours that you've selected is a prelude for flute and computer. So your relationship with Max MSP, with this famous software that you're doing these, that you're making a lot of your music in. How did that start? I mean, what's the story of you working at Cycling 74 and helping to develop Max into basically what it is now?
So I went to these summer workshops for computer music, and they were in Switzerland, in Lugano. It was organized by a university in Zurich, and they were basically just 2 weeks of sort of intensive learning about computer music, simple stuff. Nothing on specialized equipment. It was like, here's Pro Tools
Yeah.
And one of the things they showed us was this new software that hasn't been released yet, but will be released, and it was called Max.
What year is this?
1989.
1989?
1989.
Wow.
So it was it had been developed and been used at this Computer Music Research Center, IRCAM, in Paris, but it was not commercialized. So IRCAM was making a deal to commercialize it, and they were getting, there were a couple of programmers who were on board. One of them is David Ziccarelli, who is now sort of the CEO of the company that has been producing it for quite a while now, for a decade or two now. But in 1989, he was just working as a programmer for another company and trying to take this sort of buggy but very clever software where you could hook up anything to anything, and he was trying to make it into a program that could be used widely and sold commercially. So I got on board that with just MIDI at these workshops. So before I even worked for the company, eventually I worked for the company. I was a user of the software for like a couple of decades. But it was kind of weird because I used its computer music software, but I didn't ever actually use it for my own music. I just kind of instead of playing Tetris, I just make stuff in Max. Seriously. One day I'm like, well, what's more important, Tetris or Max? I threw Tetris into the trash can and said empty trash, and then I was just doing Max for 24 hours a day. But I never used Max for my own music until 2005. So this is like 16
So that's around the
years
time.
later.
That's around the time of these pieces that we're hearing today. The clarinet and computer piece, the flute and computer piece.
And I think what it was is all the tools that I imagined I might want to use in my own music weren't really all there yet. And by 2005, I'd worked for the company for 6 years and put in those pieces that I wanted to make for myself.
And I'm sure many musicians thank you for it.
Yeah, I'm sure, because
My question is, the prelude number 1 for flute and computer, is there any specific synthesizing or the synthesizing technique to composing for composing?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. So the the piece uses simple, like basic musical kind of tools like transposition. Changing the pitch of notes, and it uses like it can record things into buffers and play them back again. And it can, I think it can add a tremolo to stuff, and it can delay. And then the final thing it can do is it can do something called granular synthesis, which takes a sound and breaks it into little pieces and throws a whole bunch of them into a big cloud. And I wanted to use that to be able to make sustains, to be able to like take a sound and then sort of freeze it and make a sustained version of that sound. So I didn't want to make too crazy sounds because it was my first time actually making a piece with Max that had to function in a concert setting. So I knew that was going to be a big task to do all by myself. So I didn't try to do something too complex for my own abilities. In the next couple pieces, like in the clarinet prelude that we heard earlier, I went a little bit further into thinking about sound. But for the flute piece, I was just thinking about basic things. Like I want to delay things in time. I want to change things in pitch. I want to have the flute play a bunch of notes and then sustain that like a chord. And so the main ideas for it came from sort of musical necessity, not technological innovation or thinking. I wasn't thinking about sound. I was thinking about musical tricks. In the end, when you get granular synthesis to freeze a bunch of notes into a sound, you end up creating a sound kind of texture. But that wasn't where the idea came from. The idea came from sort of a musical need.
Great. So first, I think we should thank you very much for being with us today. It was really fun.
Thank you for having me.
Again, Richard Dudas, look up his music. Definitely catch the live performance he did earlier today in the studio. That was very, very cool. So this is the last piece for today. This is Richard Dudas's Prelude number 1 for flute and computer, 2005, and it's performed here by Matthias Ebner on flute.
리처드 두다스의 Prelude No. 1 for flute and computer 들으시겠습니다.
Thank you for listening to the 8th episode of JANUS Radio with guest Richard Dudas. We'll see you next week.
리처드 두다스와 함께한 랜스 라디오였습니다. 다음 주에 뵙겠습니다.